and welcome back to another video. My name is Chloe and this is Miss Juniper. Say hi, Juniper. Today I thought I would tell you guys about her birth story, or our birth story, and how that all happened. It was actually a pretty good birth story. It was a very positive experience, so no traumatic or trigger warnings here. Start to finish, it was a pretty smooth labor, and I thought I would just tell you guys all about it, mostly because I want to remember how her birth night went, and just because I think going into having her I was very calm, maybe almost too calm. I don't really know, I was in a very zen state, and I think that part of it was because I had listened to so many people's birth stories and TikToks and listened to nurses on TikTok and OBs on TikTok and did a lot of research going into the birth process. So I think part of that was why I was so calm, just because I kind of knew, really just kind of did research on everything that I wanted and what could happen and what I wanted in the birth. And really my birth plan was really just an epidural. That was my only birth plan, and obviously that she and I would make it through perfectly healthy. So that was my only birth plan. I didn't really have anything else going on other than that, but I thought I would just tell you guys about it, and let's just jump right in and get started. Are you giving me a mean face? She is hardcore judging. Are you judging your mama? To start, I had a couple things going on with my pregnancy. I did have gestational diabetes. I was diagnosed with that at, I think, about 28 weeks, but it was completely diet controlled. I didn't have to go on insulin, so there wasn't a huge concern with the gestational diabetes. And then around 35 weeks, 34 or 35 weeks, I started swelling really bad. So there was a concern in one of my appointments that maybe I was getting preeclamptic. Thankfully, that was not the case. They did blood work, they ran the urine sample. That was not the case, just, I think it's called edema. So basically just swelling. It was summertime, so I could definitely tell a difference when my swelling would get worse, like if it was more humid or not humid. So that was definitely something that I had going on, but it wasn't a concern of like having to get induced super early or anything. But gestational diabetes was something that they were keeping an eye on. And at my 37-week appointment, they discussed in the next couple of weeks when I would come in, they would check me to see how my cervix was looking, if I was dilated at all that good stuff. And then we would talk about an induction after seeing if I was making any progress, because they didn't really want to induce me early if I was showing no signs of going into labor anytime soon, just because there is a risk for going to a C-section if you are not really starting to progress at all. My 38-week appointment, when I went in, I was, I think, just over a centimeter dilated, and I think about like 75% effaced. So I was starting to show signs of going into labor. So they made the decision to discuss maybe scheduling an induction for the next week. At that appointment though, they did do a membrane sweep. So the doctor at that time was like, I would be surprised if I saw you this weekend, which I did not go into labor that weekend. As much as I hoped I would go into labor on Labor Day, that just didn't happen. After that appointment, I followed up with them to schedule the induction, because they had said, or the doctor had said that week before, that Friday before, we're going to schedule you next week so that you go before your 39-week date. My 39-week date would have been, I think, September 10th. Or no, that was my 40-week. Basically, they didn't want me to get to 40 weeks, so I called them, and there was a little bit of confusion because the doctor had put in the notes like, oh, schedule her an induction for the following week, which she had wrote on Friday, meaning the week next that was coming up, which would have been Labor Day week, whereas the person who was scheduling them thought that she wrote it that Monday and then was scheduling me for the week of the 11th. So it was kind of just a little bit of a mess, but we got it all cleared up, and they scheduled the induction for September 6th, starting September 6th. So we did have a doctor's appointment that September 6th, which was kind of just a waste of time, but I did get to see the OB who was going to be delivering Juniper, so it was kind of worth it in my opinion, because I was able to discuss with her like my wishes for the labor, what I wanted from it, the fact that I did want an epidural. And the reason I wanted an epidural is because I have passed out from severe pain in the past, and I was just pretty sure that at some point during the labor something was going to trigger that in me, and I just didn't really want to experience that. And thankfully my doctor was on the same page. She was like, as soon as you are in active labor, we will get you the epidural. And so I was happy to know that she was on the same page that I was on, because I had heard from TikToks that some OBs out there just basically make you wait to get the epidural. So thankfully that was not the case with my doctor. Yeah. And so they said to call the hospital that night at like 5:30, and we were supposed to go in at 7, but when I called at 5:30, they said please come in at 8. So we dropped Joy off at my parents and then headed to the hospital. And when we got there, I think they had just had a mad rush of women coming in on their own spontaneous labor. So they put us in like this really tiny room, and Dan and I were just kind of like, what is this? That was basically like the triage room. So they just kind of like started off everything, the blood work, my blood pressure, temperature, all that stuff. While we were sitting in that tiny room, that's when they came in and they put like the port in my arm. And at the time, that's usually what makes me pass out, is like that pain of like constantly getting pulled on my hand. And I didn't pass out, thankfully. But I was kind of laying there going like, oh, this is really uncomfortable. Like, I don't really like how this feels. But I reminded myself that, well, in a couple hours, that's probably gonna be the least of my worries, so let it go. And definitely, I didn't notice it after maybe an hour or so. So if that is bothering you when they first put it in, maybe just try not to think about it. And so we sat in that room, I think until about 9:15, and then eventually they moved us over to the labor and delivery room, and we got settled in. Dan had brought all the bags up, and they said to start the induction, because my cervix still wasn't fully effaced, they were going to do a cervix softening agent. I think it's called Cervitex, something like that. Softens your cervix. So they were going to do 2 of those. They were going to do one at like 9:40ish, and then the next one was going to be at 1:40. So the first one they did start at 9:40. Got that going. Me and Dan just kind of hung out. I watched Friends. He played his game on his Steam Deck, and we really just kind of enjoyed chilling out in the room. While we were chilling in the room, we did have snacks before I went into active labor, so which we had brought like nuts. We had bought like these little protein cheese puff things, basically snacks that like I could have as a gestational diabetic. Dan had brought Alani's, so we were definitely snacking up until that point. We should have probably stopped to get some food before going to the hospital, because we got to the hospital and I kind of panicked, like, what am I gonna do if I'm in labor for 3 days or a day? I think they said I wouldn't go past like the next day. But even still, I was like, I didn't eat that much before we got here. We had Subway at like 4 p.m., but it was already 8 and I was already getting hungry. So I was very happy that we brought snacks, and definitely made a world of difference. And as I was sitting there, I was thinking, wow, this bed is really, really uncomfortable. Like, this is awful. Why would they give women in labor, like, or mothers in labor, this really, really uncomfortable bed? Like, I was in so much pain and so uncomfortable, but I just kind of ignored it. Like, I can't do anything about it, so you just got to deal with it. And so after a while, we ended up going to sleep, or trying to go to sleep around midnight, I think. Which we probably should have tried to go to sleep earlier than that, but I think we were both kind of just running on adrenaline and thinking like, might as well stay up, which we should have just gotten to sleep when we could have gotten to sleep. But we did try to go to sleep around like 12 or 12:30. We had turned off all the lights and everything, and again, my back was just killing me. And around 1, I could tell what the contractions were. So basically that whole time I was having back labor, didn't realize it, and my back was having contractions instead of like in the front. And so Dan, I could tell he had fallen asleep because I could hear his like light snoring, and I was just like, oh my god, I'm in so much pain. And I'm just sitting there trying to like breathe through these contractions. And I mean, they were painful, but they weren't like over the top. Well, no, they were pretty bad. They were pretty uncomfortable, but I could, leading up to the delivery, so like that weekend that I thought I might go into labor after the membrane sweep, I was like, how am I supposed to know what's a contraction? Like, because I had been feeling what I thought were contractions. I'm pretty sure they were just Braxton Hicks at this point. But I was like, how do you time it? How do you know? How do you feel like what to time? Because it just, everything that I had felt up to that point was just kind of like, felt like a period cramp here and there. But when the contractions I was feeling in the hospital, I was watching the clock and I could literally feel the ebb and flow of them, where it would get really, really strong and then go away after like a minute. And they were coming like every 2 to 3 minutes. And so I was laying there thinking, I know the nurses are coming in at 1:40, and I think the attending was coming in at 1:40. So I was just like, I just got to get to 1:40. Then they're going to come in and I can ask them if I'm having contractions or what's going on, because I'm in a lot of pain. Didn't know what the heck was going on. So at 1:40, they turned on the lights, they came in, and I kind of was just like, I think I might be having contractions, but I'm not really sure. And they're like, well, maybe. It looks like maybe you're having contractions, but we'll check. And so they checked, and I definitely was. I was in active labor. I was 4 centimeters at that point. And they're pretty much convinced that my body just kind of went into labor on its own. Like it was just ready to go into labor. The cervix softening agent shouldn't have caused somebody to go into labor, but I think that actually happened with my cousin too, where the same thing happened to her. So maybe it's just something in our genetics, but I was in full-blown labor, and so we're thinking like, okay, it's all systems go. We're thinking like, okay, we're gonna be up all night now. Dan cracked an Alani. We had brought Alani energy drinks. So he's thinking like, all right, let me get pumped up, let me get ready. So he drinks the energy drink, and I actually had tested positive for group B strep like 36 weeks they had done the test. So before they did the epidural, they wanted me to get a dose of penicillin. So they started the penicillin, which if you aren't aware, the penicillin can burn when it goes in. So that's super fun. But my nurse, she put like one of the padsicles, she like cracked the padsicle and made it like an icy hot basically, and she put it on my wrist where the penicillin was going in, and that helped a ton. It was like amazing, and I think she had actually diluted the penicillin too to make it not as potent. But honestly, the contractions were so strong at that point, like I couldn't get comfortable, couldn't even like do anything. So I think the contractions were so strong that the penicillin really didn't bother me. But that took about 10 minutes for that to filter through. So once they did the penicillin, then they called for the epidural. And so the anesthesiologist, he was in the house, he was up in like 5 minutes, which I did ask the nurse because I was like I said, I was in a lot of pain. Wasn't at the point where I was going to pass out, but it was very, very, very uncomfortable. And so I said, how long is it going to take for the anesthesiologist to get here? Like, we talking 5 minutes? We talking an hour? We talking a couple hours? And she said, oh no, he's in the house, so he'll be right up. So I was very thankful for that. And Dan actually had to leave the room for the epidural, which I think is pretty much standard in all hospitals. But I had just watched a TikTok that morning about like it was like a doctor explaining how the epidural works. So I had fully seen like what they were gonna do, what the needle looked like, what basically like the little line that goes in your back, because the needle doesn't stay in your back. It's basically just like a IV that continually filters the numbing whatever, the anesthesia, whatever, the numbing medicine into your spine for the epidural to work. So I was feeling good about that. Like the nurse was really worried that the needle was going to make me pass out, but I don't pass out from needles. I pass out from severe pain. But even the epidural, like I barely felt the needle even go in. So that was super fine. They make you sit like you're like a cat and bend your back. And I was very calm through that, like just breathing through like, okay, I need this to get through the rest of this. So that was kind of all I was thinking, like, I just got to get through this and then the rest will be smooth sailing. So they did the epidural, took about 10-15 minutes, and then Dan came back. And so after they did the epidural, they started me on Pitocin, which had been part of my induction plan anyway. And I was happy to do the Pitocin. It wasn't something that I was like against or anything. So they started the Pitocin. They didn't want to start that though until I had the epidural, because Pitocin can make contractions even more painful. So that was kind of like the order of operations. And so they started the Pitocin, and then they were like, all right, try and get some sleep. So Dan, we just had like a huge dose of caffeine, was like, wait, what? But thankfully I had not had any caffeine, so I was able to go to sleep. Not super sleep, but like I was able to get some rest here and there. And I will say, one of the things going into having Juniper, I was very focused on the fact that I saw a lot of TikToks that said like, try not to clench your jaw, because when you clench your jaw, it clenches everything else, and just try to keep relaxed. So even with the epidural, and even before that, I was really conscious of, okay, get rid of the clenching, like breathe breathe this out. Like, get rid of the clenched feeling. Try not to be all bottled up. And even with the epidural, like when I was trying to sleep, I could tell my body was tensing up and I would like breathe it out. Who knows if that actually helped, but in my mind it was. And that was definitely made me feel better. Yeah, made me feel better. So the epidural was at 2:30 in the morning, and that's when I texted my mom and I said, hey, I went into active labor, so if you guys want to try and get here at 7 in the morning, we'll try to keep you guys updated, but that's kind of where we're at. And so they started the Pitocin, and then they came in around 3:40 to check on me again. The heart monitor and the contraction monitor both were not really working correctly. Well, the monitor for her, I think, was working correctly, but she just kept moving around. So like they kept coming in, trying to move it so they could hear her again, which I hated that part because it was like they wanted me to kind of pay attention to like, can you still hear the whoosh, 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 whoosh of her heart rate? I don't have time or energy or mental wherewithal to pay attention to that at this point. So they had to keep coming in and moving that around. And then come to find out, like later on in the labor process, my contraction monitor was never working the whole time. It was showing that it was working, but it was never actually picking up my contractions. So for the most part, I was kind of like telling them every time that I thought something was going on. Like when they came in at 1:40 and I said, hey, I think I'm having contractions, they had no idea. It wasn't showing on their machine. They were just going off of what I said, which I don't really care. It all worked out in the end, and I almost kind of feel like I had like, not a home birth because clearly you're in a hospital, but the ability to listen to my own body and kind of tell them what was going on versus them telling me what was going on. So I did actually like that a lot. So when they came in at 3:40 to check me again, the nurse did all of her stuff, and then literally as she was walking out the door, my water broke on its own. They had said they were going to come back in like an hour to do it. Well, Juniper decided, nah, we're coming right now. So the water was broken and it popped so loud Dan could hear it. Like that was not fun. That was his biggest fear the whole time that I was pregnant, that my water was going to break like in the car or in the house somewhere. So I'm definitely appreciative that it didn't break at home. I would much prefer it breaking in a hospital, in a place that I don't have to worry about cleaning up. So my water broke. It broke at like 3:47 a.m. So things are moving fast. I mean, we figure 1:40 they came in, told me I was in active labor. 2:30 I got the epidural. 3:40 my water broke. So things are progressing pretty quickly, faster than I thought that they would. And then at 5:30 a.m. they came in, and because her heart rate monitor wasn't picking her up as much as they would like it to, they checked me again. And well, first they were going to check to put like the fetal monitor in her head, which I was not super keen on them doing, but I wasn't going to say no. I mean, I didn't want them to do it, but like I said, I wasn't going to say no. I'm certainly not going to say no just because if something did go wrong and they needed that in there to check on her and know what her heart rate was doing, I wouldn't be able to forgive myself if that was how they would have been able to tell. So when they asked me, I said, okay, sure. And then they went to check me and the doctor goes, yeah, we don't need to do that. She's 8 centimeters dilated, fully effaced, like we are almost at go time, which was crazy to hear because you figure from 1:40 to 5:30 now I've gone from another 4 centimeters. So like things are moving fast, and they're going like, she doesn't need the fetal head monitoring because she's gonna be coming down this pipeline real quick. At that point now we kind of had to make a decision because they wanted to do another round of penicillin basically right before she was gonna be born. And so they said, okay, we're gonna come back at like 6:30 and give you another round of penicillin. And I said, okay. But at this point I'm starting to feel pressure, which if you didn't know, an epidural, generally if they do it correctly, you will still feel pressure once the baby starts like coming down your pelvic area. Like it won't be painful from the contractions, but you're gonna feel the pressure of a baby basically being in that area, in that general region. And it's gonna be like in your butt, it's gonna be painful. And so it's something to like kind of know going ahead into it, like your epidural's not failing, it's still working. You'd be in a lot more pain if it wasn't working, but you are gonna feel pressure. So About 30 minutes later, after they had checked me at 5:30, so around 6, the nurse came back in and I think I actually called her back in. I think I pressed the nurse's button. I called her back in and I said, if you want to do penicillin, I think we need to do it like right now. Like, I don't think we have another 30 minutes. So they got the penicillin going, and I really wanted the penicillin again because I certainly didn't want the strep B to possibly infect Juniper. I was definitely concerned about that. Like, I didn't, because the risk of strep B is that like it can lead to meningitis for a baby and a couple other things. So like I was very concerned about that. So I was definitely like, let's get this penicillin going right now. So she came in and she did it again. And I think because the epidural was working and my contractions weren't super painful, that one I felt the penicillin in the burning. And it's also possible that she didn't dilute it as much because we were in a time crunch. And I did have the ice pack on my hand again, but it was not as helpful as it was the first time. And that was like the one time where I felt like I might pass out. Like, the burning actually was making me feel pretty woozy. So I just told Dan, I was like, please just hold my hand. Don't squeeze it. Just lay your hand in mine. I just need to feel your hand in mine. So I was definitely feeling the pain in that one. The penicillin stopped at maybe 6:10, 6:20, and I started pushing at 6:35. So we were pretty close to like turning this around. And so at 6:35 I started pushing, and I pushed for about, she was born at 7:17, so just about 40 minutes I pushed. And then she was born. And when she was born at 7:17 on 9/7, and she weighed 7 pounds 5 ounces, which it was funny because when I was pushing, we said to the nurse, like, I wonder if she'll be born at like a number that, we knew she was gonna be born in like the 7 o'clock hour. Pretty much, we knew, just by how like the pushing was going after a few pushes. And I was like, I wonder if she'll be born at like 7:07. The nurse was like, I don't know about 7:07, but maybe 7:17. In which, once we got to that point, I wasn't even looking at the clock. But after like a few minutes, I was like, wait, what time was she born at? And it was 7:17. And so she has a lot of sevens in her birthday. And I think that's so cute. Just, she's gonna be a lucky little girl. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't too bad of a labor. Considering I only pushed for 40 minutes. The nurses were all amazing. The doctor was amazing. She came in at the end. I mean, it's funny because you think like, oh, my doctor's going to live with the baby. The nurses are the ones who take care of you pretty much the whole labor process. It's really just the doctor delivering the baby and like stitching you back up if you need to be stitched back up. The actual pushing went pretty good. They seemed impressed that I could feel when my contractions were like coming and going. I wasn't in pain from them, but I could tell when they were coming and going, even with the epidural. And obviously I felt the pressure of her down there, but nothing was like excruciating pain. I was pretty calm through the whole process. I mean, even when like the last push, they were like, Mom, open your eyes. Because I was just like dialed in, focused. We're gonna get this baby. And so she came out and she had her little head of hair. And she was perfect. She actually cried pretty much right away, which the nurse had warned us, like, it's not gonna be like the movies. Babies usually need to be like shaken and kind of woken up to cry. But she, as soon as they like pulled her out, she was pretty much crying. Dan cut the umbilical cord, which I don't know if I like kind of blacked out or went into shock for a minute, because I remember them saying, Dad, do you want to cut the cord? Which they had asked him before. And then from that point, I don't really know when they took her to like get her cleaned up. I remember Dan still standing next to me and them saying like, oh, Dad, do you want to come like see Juniper, like take pictures of her? So I do remember that, but it must have been a quick little blackout. Dan thinks I might have been a little bit in a shock, which maybe I was. But overall, I was really, really happy with the entire delivery, with the doctors, with the nurses. The nurses all there are literally angels on earth, and they deserve like constant medals for how they take care of women in labor. It was just, I couldn't have asked for a better delivery. Definitely was happy that it went as quick as it did, but she was great right off the bat. Because I had gestational diabetes, they did have to check her sugar. I think it was like every hour or 2 hours for the first 24 hours, but she passed every single feeding with flying colors, so there was no issue with that. Her APGAR was, I think they said 9.9, but I thought it was a whole number, so either a 9 or a 9.9, but she was basically a perfect baby right off the bat. I would say my tips for things to bring to the hospital with you, I definitely liked having my own pillow, which Dan and I went and just got $4 pillows from Target to bring with us. That way we could have them packed constantly and we didn't care if they got ruined because they were $4 pillows. But I would definitely recommend doing that because the pillows at the hospital, at least at my hospital, were pretty thin and kind of just not good. And I also would recommend bringing blankets for you and your partner. I had brought like this really soft pink blanket, and when my contractions were really, really bad at 1:40 in the morning, that was like my comfort blanket. Like it felt like Joy, our pug's ears, and I usually play with Joy's ears like I'm stressed or when I'm just petting her, so I was literally just like playing with the blanket like, okay, I got this, I got this. But overall, I'm happy that it was a very calm experience. There was no stress. It was pretty chill. I stayed pretty calm through most of it. Like I said, I wasn't scared going into it. Like I knew it was going to be painful, but I pretty much had the mindset like, it's just temporary. It's just going to be maybe a couple days of excruciating pain, but then it's done. Like as soon as you have a baby, you're good. Like it stops. I will say the after delivery was more painful than the actual delivery. Like the just basically healing from going through labor was more painful in my opinion, but overall wasn't too bad. I think because I had done so much research ahead of time just from the TikToks and watching people's birth stories, which is why I wanted to share my birth story, I felt pretty comfortable going into it. Like I know what could happen and what are the possibilities. And I think watching the stories of things that go wrong are helpful to know what could go wrong. I think it's also important to share the stories of ones that are a pretty positive experience and pretty chill from start to end. And overall, we're just very grateful and thankful for our little Miss Juniper who's here and she's healthy and she's perfect. And she's a good eater, she's a good sleeper. She pretty much sleeps through the night for her 3-hour stretches, like dead on. Like she's like a little alarm clock. Like I put her down at 4:10, we're waking up at 7:10. So she's pretty good about waking us up for her feedings. But yeah, she's a great little baby. We're so thankful. And Joy is doing great as a big sister. She gets a little jealous if Dan holds Juniper, but overall she does pretty good. So, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions down below, leave them. I'm super happy to answer any questions you have. And thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye!